Hey everybody, welcome to Sunday School once again. And Josh did a Sunday School lesson last week and closed out that session. And we're starting a new session this week titled You've Heard It Said. And then it makes the statement that not everything our culture tells us is true. It's a pretty good statement, and I like it a lot because there's a lot to be said for that. Not everything that we hear is always true. There's been a lot in the news about that lately, and just listening to your friends can't always rely on everything they tell you to be the complete truth. The lesson we're looking at today is actually a portion of, we're taking out of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and it's going to be coming out of Matthew. My phone. There we go. And it's Matthew chapter 5, verses 20 through 26 is where the text is coming from today. What we're looking at is in this lesson is going to talk a little bit about bullying, but it's really that's the underlying, if you will, what the lesson about really is sin, and the activity that we would have been doing if we were in a classroom is I would have gone around the room and I had you tell me what you think what is the worst sin, what is the worst sin that you can think of, and we would have had a discussion about that. But when it comes to Jesus' messages and that, the definition of what may be the worst sin may actually surprise you a little bit compared to the list that we probably would have been able to come up with. So let's go into the scripture for the lesson. And like I said, it's Matthew chapter 5, verses 20 through 26. For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You've heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court, and whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says you fool shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you are with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the last cent. And when you listen to what Jesus is saying there, those are red words. When you listen to what Jesus is saying there, does that kind of change your perspective on sin and what might be worse than something else? We probably would have said murder would be the worst sin out there, but and it is bad. Don't get me wrong, but Jesus puts it into a different perspective, where if we're holding something against somebody, or if we're talking bad about them or saying bad things, that those things can be just as bad as the actual act of killing someone. So holding a grudge against somebody, those are things that we probably wouldn't have thought of when we were coming up with our original list of the worst sin out there. The first session, or the first section of this, the number one, says that we've heard that certain sins are worse than others, and we always have heard that. And that's not to say, sin is a sin, but we've always been able to kind of justify, if you will, or rank sins. Well, at least that, I may have did this, but it wasn't as bad as that, or something like that. So we have to be careful with that. I think is one of the most underlying things that we have to look at in this lesson is just having to be careful about that. But then it gets they've paired some things up. It's, in the following pairs, which sin seems worse to you and why? Which is worse, calling somebody names or murder? Well, in reality, murder probably, right? But can you commit that character murder, if you will, by calling somebody names. That's uh, that's why they correlate. That's how they go together. Which is worse, being angry with somebody or cussing them out? Holding a grudge against someone or pretending to be holy. You think you're well, I'm a Christian, so I don't have to worry about that, and I just don't like them or whatever. They wronged me, and I'm just not going to forgive them. Well, that's not a good attitude to have either. So when we look at these things, we have to look at it may not be as severe or as serious as a that act of murder, but there's that character assassination, if you will. It's something that we have to be very careful about as well. It asks the question, why might Jesus consider anger and cursing just as serious as murder? And again, I think it has to do with that character assassination. That it's not the physical act of killing somebody, but killing uh, your your reputation or whatever by saying things to them. It's just a bad thing to do. And that's the question, in your opinion, what qualifies as bullying? And after we've looked at that passage, does that kind of maybe change it a little bit? Does it kind of change your mind or your perspective on what bullying might be? Um, do you think that Jesus would define bullying the same way that we would have defined it? Can you see if you've ever been the victim of a bully in the past, what type of a toll that it's taken on you? Was there a physical response or a physical reaction? Was it all mental or emotional? The things that, regardless of the old saying, sticks and stones, right? Uh, Words can be very harmful, and people oftentimes forget that words can be that harmful to somebody. Based on the verses, do you consider yourself a bully? That's sometimes a tough question to answer. You may think that you're not, but when in reality, sometimes your actions may lead to you showing that you might be. Um, may not You may not have intended to start it out that day bullying somebody, but something that you said to someone and caused them a lot of emotional, personal grief or emotional grief. You may have just put yourself into that category. I guess this last question really on that section is how can you hold one another accountable in this area? That's something that you really need to take a hold of and look at. Being accountable for your actions. Who is your accountability partner, so to speak? Who is that person that you can go to and talk to and ask questions and just get to guide you and to help you along on some of these thoughts and some of these things that you face on a daily basis. That's something that's really important, I think, for you to have is that accountability partner, somebody that you can talk to, somebody that can maybe just give you the look, if you will, when you may be either doing or fixing to do something you probably shouldn't do. Sometimes we feel as if we're good people because we compare the little things that we do to the big sins of other people. Well, it's not, like I said, I did this, but that's not near as bad as so and so over there who did that. That's a lot worse. I must be okay. The reality of that is every sin is a violation of God's law. So a sin is a sin, regardless. Some may be worse than others, but some of the things that you may think are worse physically, those emotional or those mental things may be even far more worse. We will all go, most of us will go our whole lives and never kill somebody, okay? I mean, it's just especially that anger, murder somebody. The odds are that that's not going to happen, hopefully, anyway. But have you ever said something that made somebody else feel bad, made them angry, made them upset, or made them feel bad because you were calling them names or doing something that you shouldn't be doing? The second part of this says that Jesus says that every sin is worthy of judgment. So that's something that we need to really take into account as well. Every sin is worthy of judgment. In verse 20, again, it says that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. I mean, the scribes and the Pharisees were the religious experts of the time. They knew the law, they lived the law, and so everybody would have thought that they would have been the perfect ones to go into heaven. And how can I live up to that? And I feel the same way really about Jesus. I know that I'm not perfect, but I can still strive to be as good as I possibly can, and try not to intentionally do things to cause issues with other people. Jesus said that it's kind of interesting because Jesus was basically saying that the scribes and the Pharisees, that was almost like their ticket to heaven. But we all know that there's really only one way to heaven, right? And that's with the acceptance of Him. So that before Jesus came and did die on the cross for us, the law, the rules, that's all that they could do is go by the law and the rules. Well, we still need to go by the law and the rules, but that just because we're good and go by the law and the rules doesn't mean that we're going to go to heaven. We have to have that personal relationship with Him. How does it feel to know that you can never be good enough to get into heaven? We all probably know somebody that's just that genuinely good person. They would never do anything wrong. They go out of their way to make sure that everything is done right. But there still may be something missing in their life. It's a void, if you will, that void that may never get filled. And unfortunately, if we don't step up and try to explain to them and try to show them the way through Jesus, then they may not make it to heaven. And that's kind of sad, if you will, that they've worked towards and they've strived for that, being good in that, but then they just didn't make that final step. How does it feel to know that Jesus already took care of that for us by dying on the cross? Would you like to try to go through life following every rule that was ever written? How difficult would that be? But knowing that we still need to play nice. We still need to be going by the rules as best we can. But that's not what gets us into heaven. It's that personal relationship with Him, and that's important. And knowing that, and knowing that Jesus died on the cross for us, so that we can strive for His perfection, that's a comfort to me. When are we obligated to point out other people's sins? And is that something that we have to be careful of so that we're not really trying to judge somebody? I mentioned that accountability partner a little earlier, and it's nice to have that. And if I have an accountability partner and I see something, then I see their actions are not quite what they need to be, then I can say something to them. Am I saying something to them being judgmental, or am I saying something to them because I love them and I want them to try to do the right thing? I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm trying to help them out. And that's the same thing that I would hope that my accountability partner would do for me. It would tell me, help me, push me along, let me know that there is this issue and you need to work it out. You need to do what you need to do. And you have to be careful with that. It's not really judgment. It's just you're trying to be helpful with somebody, and that to me is important. That needs to be. It's really important to have that with somebody, that type of a relationship with somebody that you can say something to, and they respect you for that. The third section here, real quick, is Jesus wants to transform our words and attitudes, not just our behavior. He challenged us to take action against any hatred or wrongdoing that takes hold of our own hearts. If we can do that, if we can look inward and see and make those changes, that's going to help with the outside appearances as well. Knowing that I don't want to cause this person any type of injury or harm by using words against them will keep me from using those words against them. So I think that that's a good thing to point out with that. Verses 20 through 26, what effects can harboring that anger and holding grudges against other people have on your relationship with them? Is it easy for you to maintain and continue a healthy relationship with somebody if you're holding a grudge against them, if you're not forgiving them for if they slighted or wronged you in some way? And I think we've all run into that type of a situation before where we're like, well, I don't like what so and so said, so I'm just not going to be so and so's friend anymore. Well, that's just not the way life is, guys. Come on. You just don't need to hold those grudges. You don't need to harbor those bad, ill feelings. Why does Jesus want us to resolve our problems with other people before we worship Him? It's a good question, but it's pretty self-explanatory. How can I have a loving relationship with Him if I can't have a loving relationship with my friends or my family or whomever that I might be holding a grudge against? That's like a wall that's built up that is actually separating me from Jesus. So I need to tear that wall down by that forgiveness and that, so I can go to Him for forgiveness as well. I go to the other person first, and then I can go to Jesus. How do you think Jesus might want us to interact with people who call themselves Christians but hold hatred in their heart towards others? And that goes back up into the last section where we were talking about judgment. We're not trying to be judgmental if we point that out. What we're trying to do is be helpful when we point that out, and that's something I think is very important, and I think that's something that God wants us to do. If we have if we have knowledge of these types of situations, then we need to really help those individuals. We need to do it in a loving way, though, and not in a judgmental way. How much you need to think differently about the words you use and talk to and about other people. Hopefully something that has come through in this lesson has maybe helped you out and made you stop and think about maybe before you say something next time. Maybe you'll just kind of hold that in, not calling somebody names, not talking about them badly, or whatever the case may be. Not being judgmental, but being helping hold a friend accountable for their actions in that. So these are all things that we need to do, and it's our obligation. I mean, it's our part of our commitment to being a friend, having that type of a relationship with somebody. It's part of our Christian obligation, our Christian duties, and it's something that we just need to do, and we need to do it in a loving manner and not in a judgmental manner. That's the main thing, is not being judgmental. Trying to hold somebody accountable is not being judgmental. It's being helpful. Hopefully giving you something to think about in this lesson this week. It's a good lesson. I liked it. I thought it was informative, and again, it's just something to make you think, and it's something that is pertinent. It's something that we can all see and hear and feel and touch and that each one of us can relate to in some way. We've either been the victim of a bully, we were the bully, or we at least know somebody that was. So I want you to think about all of this stuff. I can't wait to be able to get back to church, back into the Sunday school class with you guys, so we can sit down and talk and interact and laugh and cut up and have fun like we always have. And I just look forward to that. Hopefully within the next month or so, we may be able to do that. In the meantime, we'll keep doing Sunday school this way. It's not my favorite, but it's still something to do. It's the only way really we can do this. So love you guys. I hope that everything is going well, and just do the best you can, like the rest of us, to try to get through these times and move on. So, thank you guys very much. Love you, and we'll see you guys soon, hopefully.